The documents were still warm from the printer as I laid them on my mahogany desk. The words, DNA paternity test results, emblazoned across the top in clinical blue letters. Beyond the window of my corner office, Manhattan glittered in the evening. Light, oblivious to how my world had just shattered and reconstructed itself in the span of 4 business days. I hadn't cried yet, curious how the mind responds to seismic revelations, shock first, emotions later. Ms. Kincaid, your 7 o'clock. With Harrison Media is confirmed. My assistant's voice through the intercom barely registered as I traced my finger over the definitive percentage. 0.00% probability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 10 years of marriage. A decade of building a life with Richard. All of it dissolved with a text message 3 months ago. I can't do this anymore. Moving in with Veronica. Will have my lawyer contact yours. Veronica, his 26-year-old secretary with the carefully cultivated Instagram aesthetic and annoying habit of calling me Mrs. K whenever I'd visit Richard at his firm. I'd built a reputation as one of New York's most formidable corporate attorneys, known for dismantling hostile takeovers with surgical precision. Yet I'd missed the hostile takeover happening in my own marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ms. Kincaid? My assistant's voice again, more insistent. Reschedule Harrison, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Something urgent has come up. I turned back to the documents, to the supporting evidence that changed everything. When I'd ordered the DNA test, it had been a desperate grasp at understanding, a way to confirm that the 10-year-old daughter Richard had always claimed wasn't his actually was. He'd used Emma's existence as his emotional shield throughout our marriage. I have baggage, he'd warned on our 3rd date. My ex and I have a daughter. I only see her twice a year, but child support takes a chunk of my income. I'd fallen for it completely. The devoted father making sacrifices for a child from a previous relationship. The monthly payments I never questioned. The awkward summer visits and Christmas gifts. All of it. A decade-long performance. The papers trembled slightly in my hand. The DNA results hadn't revealed what I expected, that Emma was his daughter, evidence of his one truth amid the lies. Instead, they confirmed what should have been impossible. Richard had a 0.0% probability of being Emma's biological father. Preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story, which meant 10 years of child support payments, 10 years of baggage, 10 years of his most consistent excuse for our financial limitations, all fabricated. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Meredith, please. Stop calling Veronica's parents. It's getting embarrassing. I hadn't called anyone. Another lie, this one designed to make me appear unstable to our mutual friends. Classic Richard. I picked up my phone and typed with deliberate precision. I need to see you. Tomorrow, noon, my office. His response came quickly. Not a good time. Maybe next week. I sent him a photo of the DNA test results with a single word. Noon. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. What the hell is this? Tomorrow you'll find out. Heart hammered against my ribs as I locked my phone, but my hands remained steady. The numbness was wearing off, anger seeping in to replace it. Not just anger at the betrayal, but at myself, for being so thoroughly deceived by a man whose lies wouldn't have survived the first round of cross-examination in my courtroom. I swiveled my chair to face the Manhattan skyline, the city lights blurring slightly as I finally allowed tears to well up. Not tears of sadness, but of a curious cold fury that resembled clarity. Claire, I called through the intercom. Cancel all my appointments for tomorrow morning and afternoon. Yes, Ms. Kincaid. Anything else? I thought for a moment. Yes, Call Samantha Miller at Miller and Associates. Tell her I need everything they have on Richard's finances. Every account, every transaction for the past 10 years. Samantha Miller, isn't she the best forensic accountant in the city? Yes. I paused. And Claire? This stays between us. Of course, Ms. Kincaid. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the vintage Macallan 25 Richard had given me for our 5th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me as I poured 3 fingers into a crystal tumbler. He'd probably used my own money to buy it. How many other aspects of our life together had been constructed from my earnings while he siphoned funds elsewhere? The whiskey burned pleasantly as I contemplated the possibilities. Where had the money really gone? A secret family? Gambling debts? Or simply a decade-long scam by a man who'd recognized an ambitious young attorney as the perfect mark? Successful, enough to support him? Too busy to notice discrepancies in their shared finances? My phone buzzed again. Richard. Meredith, this is ridiculous. What kind of game are you playing now? I didn't respond. Let him stew overnight, imagining what I knew. Let him construct hasty defenses against accusations he could only guess at. Tomorrow, he would face a seasoned litigator who had never lost a case, not an emotional, estranged wife. The whiskey was working its magic, dulling the sharper edges of my anger, allowing me to think strategically. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint cloud storage, an account Richard probably thought I'd forgotten existed. Most of the folders contained mundane household documents, insurance policies, tax returns, holiday photos. But I was looking for something specific. There, a folder titled Emma CS Receipts. Inside were meticulously organized documents, 10 years of receipts for cashier's checks, all made out to Catherine Walsh, Emma's supposed mother. The amounts increased over the years, starting at $1,800 monthly and eventually reaching $3,200. Over 10 years, Richard had diverted nearly $300,000 from our life together to whom? I downloaded everything, then opened a new browser tab and searched for Catherine Walsh, New York. Too common a name, thousands of results. I refined my search. Catherine. Walsh Emma, daughter Richard. Nothing relevant. I sat back, sipping my whiskey, thinking like the attorney I was. If Catherine Walsh was real, she'd have some connection to Richard before our relationship began. I added his law school to the search parameters. Still nothing. On a hunch, I tried one more search. Catherine Walsh obituary. The third result made me nearly drop my glass. An obituary from the Buffalo Gazette, dated 12 years ago. Catherine Walsh, 29, died unexpectedly on March 17th. She is survived by her parents, Robert and Jean Walsh, and her sister, Victoria. Victoria. Veronica. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the scant details of Catherine Walsh's life. The obituary mentioned she had been a paralegal at Harrington and Bowles, Richard's first law firm after graduation. No mention of a daughter. I searched for Victoria Walsh and found a LinkedIn profile for a Victoria W., who had also worked at Harrington and Bowles, starting as a filing clerk 11 years ago. Her profile photo showed a younger version of the woman I knew as Veronica, Richard's secretary turned lover. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so twisted I almost couldn't comprehend it. Richard had invented a child with his dead colleague, possibly to explain payments to her sister, the same sister he was now leaving me for. But why? What kind of scheme required a decade of elaborate lies about a non-existent child? I drained my glass and poured another, my mind racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Whatever the truth, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Richard had underestimated me. Fatally. My intercom buzzed, startling me from my thoughts. Ms. Kincaid, I have Samantha Miller returning your call. I pressed the button. Put her through. Meredith? Samantha's voice was as crisp and precise as I remembered. Claire said it's urgent. Sam, I need a complete financial autopsy, and I need it yesterday." She chuckled. "You lawyers and your impossible deadlines. What am I looking for?" Everything. About Richard's finances for the past decade. Joint accounts, personal accounts, investments, properties, shell companies, offshore holdings, the works. "Sounds like someone's been naughty," she remarked. "Divorce proceedings?" "Let's just say, I'm preparing for a conversation." "Must be quite a conversation. This level of investigation isn't cheap, Meredith." "Price is no object. And Sam, I need absolute discretion." "Always. I'll start tonight. Might have preliminary findings by morning if I pull an all-nighter. Whatever it takes. Send the bill to my personal account." After ending the call, I leaned back in my chair, the familiar leather conforming to my shape in a way that reminded me I'd spent more time in this office than in the luxury condo Richard and I had shared. Work had always been my refuge, my arena of complete control and competence. Now it would become my war room. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing, organizing my thoughts as I would for a complex case. Known facts. Richard claimed to have a daughter, Emma, with Catherine Walsh DNA test. Proves Richard is not Emma's father. Catherine Walsh died 12 years ago. Catherine was a paralegal at Richard's. First firm Catherine's sister, Victoria Veronica, worked at the same firm. Richard has been paying $800 $3,200 monthly for child support. Total payments, approximately $300,000 over 10 years. Richard is now in a relationship with Victoria Veronica. Questions. Where did the money really go? Was there ever a child at all? What is Veronica's role in this deception? Are there other victims besides me? What was Richard's endgame? My phone buzzed with another text from Richard. "Whatever you think. You found? You're wrong. You're making a fool of yourself." Again. Classic gaslighting, attempting to make me doubt the evidence in front of me. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I opened a secure browser and logged into an investigative database used by my firm for background checks on potential clients. It was technically against policy to use it for personal matters, but tonight I wasn't concerned with policy. I searched for Victoria Walsh and downloaded her complete background report. Victoria Walsh, born in Buffalo, New York, 31 years. OO bachelor's degree in business administration from Buffalo State. Moved to New York City 11 years ago. No criminal record, no marriages, no children. Current address. A luxury apartment in Tribeca I'd never heard of. Definitely not Richard's place. I cross-referenced the address. The property was owned by an LLC called Emmeline Holdings. Another piece clicking into place. Emma, Catherine, Emmeline. Someone had a pattern. A quick search revealed that Emmeline Holdings owned 6 properties across Manhattan and Brooklyn, all high-end residential units. The LLC was registered in Delaware, its ownership obscured behind layers of corporate anonymity. Phone buzzed again. Not Richard this time, but my sister Abigail. "Hey, stranger, just checking if we're still on for brunch Sunday? The girls are asking about their favorite aunt." Normal life, continuing in parallel to whatever twilight zone I'd entered. I hesitated before responding, uncertain if I'd even be functional by Sunday. "Wouldn't miss it," I typed, deciding that, whatever happened tomorrow, I wouldn't let Richard steal anything else from me, especially not time with my nieces. The office had grown quiet around me, everyone else long gone. I glanced at my watch. 11:30 p.m. The thought of returning to my empty condo held no appeal. Since Richard's departure, I'd been living like a ghost there anyway, sleeping in the guest room to avoid the bed we'd shared, ordering takeout instead, of using the kitchen we'd renovated together, everything a reminder of the life I thought we were building. As if reading my thoughts, my phone buzzed with an email notification from the real estate agent I'd contacted. Subject line, Penthouse. Listing 11 Riverside Boulevard. The condo wasn't even on the market yet, but Jessica knew what I was looking for. A fresh start, no memories, no ghosts. I clicked through the photos, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, minimalist design, clean lines, nothing that reminded me of the warmth Richard and I had cultivated in our home. Perfect. Please arrange a viewing for this weekend, I replied, making another decision. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would emerge unshackled, from Richard, from our shared spaces, from the life built on his elaborate fictions. My desk phone rang. The direct line that bypassed Claire, known only to a handful of people. At this hour, it could only be one person. Martin, I answered, knowing my law partner's habits all too well. Burning the midnight oil, Meredith? I just saw the Harrison Media reschedule. Everything all right? Martin Blackwell had been my mentor, then my partner, and the closest thing I had to a father figure after my own father's early death. He knew me well enough to sense when something was amiss. Personal matter? I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Nothing that will affect the Westmore merger. I wasn't calling about Westmore. He paused. You've seemed distracted since Richard left. If you need time, what I need, I interrupted, is for people to stop treating me like I might shatter. I'm handling it. Never doubted that for a second, he said, his tone softening. Just remember you have allies, Meredith. Whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone. The unexpected kindness threatened to crack my carefully maintained composure. I swallowed hard before responding. Thank you, Martin. I might take you up on that soon, but for now, I need to handle this my way. Your way usually involves scorched earth and no survivors, he noted with a chuckle. Should I be worried about the firm's reputation? Only if the firm has been secretly siphoning money from me for a decade, I replied, allowing a hint of the bitterness I felt to seep through. Martin was silent for a moment. That bad, huh? Worse, I admitted. But I'm gathering evidence before I make my next move, just like I taught you, he said, pride evident in his voice. Well, whatever you're planning, I trust your judgment. Just promise me one thing. What's that? If you need a character witness to testify that Richard is the scum of the earth, I get first dibs. I never liked that smug bastard. That startled. A genuine laugh from me, the first since I'd received the DNA results. I'll keep that in mind. Good night, Martin. After hanging up, I realized I felt slightly lighter. The reminder that I had people in my corner, people who had seen through Richard when I couldn't, was strangely comforting. My phone buzzed with another text from Richard, this one longer than the others. Meredith, I've spoken with my attorney. Whatever you think you've discovered is circumstantial at best. I've always been honest about my obligations to Emma. If you're attempting to use this to extort a better divorce settlement, it won't work. I'm willing to meet tomorrow. But only with both our attorneys present. So he was lawyering up. Good. It meant he was scared. I typed my response carefully. No attorneys. Just you and me, unless you'd prefer I take what I've found directly to the DA's office. Fraud across state lines is a federal offense, Richard. Noon. My office. His response was immediate. This is exactly why I left. You're impossible to reason with. I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I gathered the DNA test results, the financial documents I'd found, and Victoria Walsh's background report into a leather portfolio. Tomorrow I would bring it all with me, along with whatever Samantha delivered overnight. The whiskey had done its work, dulling the sharper edges of my anger and hurt, replacing them with cold determination. I shut down my computer, locked the portfolio in my desk, and finally prepared to leave. As I stood in the elevator descending to the parking garage, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors, designer suit slightly rumpled, blonde hair falling from its usually perfect chignon, dark circles beginning to form under my eyes. For a moment, I hardly recognized myself. Then I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my hair, and lifted my chin. Richard had chosen to tangle with Meredith Kincaid, senior partner at Blackwell and Kincaid, the woman who had never lost a case. His mistake. The elevator doors opened to the nearly empty parking garage. My Audi waited in its reserved spot, one of the few indulgences I'd allowed myself after making partner 5 years ago. As I slid behind the wheel, my phone buzzed one final time. Richard again. Fine. Noon. But this ends tomorrow. I smiled, a cold expression that wouldn't have looked out of place in a courtroom as I delivered a devastating cross-examination. No, Richard, I whispered to the empty car. Tomorrow is just the beginning. As I drove through the quiet streets of nighttime Manhattan toward my soon-to-be former home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since receiving Richard's text 3 months ago, a sense of control. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would no longer be the victim of his deception. I would be the architect of his reckoning. The night doorman nodded respectfully as I entered my building, his expression carefully neutral. Everyone had been walking on eggshells around me since Richard left, as if divorce were contagious. "Evening, Ms. Kincaid," he said, pressing the elevator button for me. "Good evening, Eduardo," I replied, then hesitated. "Has Mr. Winters been by recently to collect anything?" A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "Not in the past week, ma'am." "If he does come by, please let me know immediately." "Of course, Ms. Kincaid." The elevator whisked me to the 32nd floor, where the condo Richard and I had purchased to celebrate my making partner waited. I remembered how excited we'd been, planning renovations, choosing furniture, imagining our future in this space, all while he was maintaining his elaborate fiction about Emma and channeling funds to God knows where. I unlocked the door and stepped. Inside, greeted by silence and the faint scent of the lilies I'd bought 3 days ago. They were beginning to wilt now, dropping pale petals onto the console table beneath them. Like my marriage, beautiful in appearance, but already dead at the core. I hung my coat and kicked off my heels, padding in stockinged feet toward the kitchen. The marble countertops gleamed in the dim light from the under-cabinet fixtures I'd left on. Another habit from when I'd expected someone to be waiting for me, to care if I returned home to darkness. Opening the refrigerator, I surveyed its sparse contents. A bottle of champagne, for what celebration I couldn't recall. A container of Greek yogurt, some withered vegetables, and a selection of condiments. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cooked a proper meal here. Since Richard left, food had become merely fuel, consumed at my desk or ordered in when absolutely necessary. I closed the refrigerator and grabbed a water bottle instead, suddenly aware of how the Macallan had dulled my senses. Tomorrow would require absolute clarity. As I moved through the dim apartment toward the guest room that had become my refuge, I passed the closed door to our former bedroom. On impulse, I pushed it open for the first time in months. Everything remained exactly as it had been the day Richard left. The king-size bed with its dove-gray linens, the matching nightstands with their carefully chosen lamps, the framed black-and-white photographs from our travels. A mausoleum to a marriage that had never truly existed. I stepped inside, drawn to Richard's closet. He'd taken only what he needed for a few days, promising to arrange for the rest later. Another lie, evidently. I slid open the door, revealing his carefully organized wardrobe. Bespoke suits, color-coordinated dress shirts, Italian leather shoes. My fingers trailed across the fabric of his suits, pausing at the blue Tom Ford he'd worn to our 10th anniversary dinner just 2 months before he left. How carefully he must have maintained his fiction, smiling across the table at 11 Madison Park, raising his glass to 10 more years while already planning his exit. Had there been signs? Moments when the mask slipped? I searched my memory, but found only ordinary marital moments. Disagreements about work hours, occasional distance attributed to stress, nights when he'd come home late claiming client dinners. Nothing that screamed elaborate financial scheme. I closed the closet door and turned to leave when something caught my eye, a cufflink on the carpet near the dresser, partially hidden by the edge of the rug. I bent to pick it up, recognizing it immediately. Platinum with a small sapphire inset, part of the set I'd given Richard for his 40th birthday last year. He'd been here recently. Eduardo's discomfort suddenly making sense. Richard had been in our home, in our bedroom, taking or leaving things without informing me. Another violation, another deception. I clutched the cufflink tightly, its edges pressing into my palm as I fought a sudden wave of fury. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. I left the master bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me, and continued to the guest room, my room now. Unlike the rest of the apartment, this space had begun to reflect my new reality. Gone were the decorative pillows and throws, replaced by stacks of legal briefs and case files. The bedside table held legal thrillers instead of the literary fiction Richard had preferred. The television I'd installed displayed CNBC instead of the independent films we used to watch together. I placed the cufflink on the dresser, a tangible reminder of what was at stake tomorrow. Then I methodically prepared for bed, following the same routine I'd established since Richard's departure. Shower, silk pajamas, hair braided to prevent tangles, night cream applied with mechanical precision. As I slid between the cool sheets, my phone buzzed one final time. Not Richard, but Samantha. Found something interesting. Call me when you wake up, no matter how early. My heart quickened. Whatever Samantha had discovered, it was significant enough to prompt a midnight text. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., knowing sleep would be elusive, but necessary. Tomorrow would require all my faculties, all my strength, all my strategic thinking. As I drifted toward sleep, my mind continued to assemble and reassemble the pieces of the puzzle Richard had left behind. Catherine Walsh, her death, her sister Victoria, Veronica, the fictional child Emma, the real estate company Emmeline Holdings, the monthly payments, Richard's careful cultivation of my trust while systematically betraying it. What kind of man creates such an elaborate deception? What kind of attorney fails to see it happening under her own roof? Tomorrow, I would have answers. And Richard would learn what happens when you deceive a woman who makes her living uncovering the truths people try to hide. My alarm jolted me awake at 5:30 a.m., though I'd barely slept. The few hours I'd managed were filled with fragmented dreams. Richard. Laughing with a faceless woman, stacks of money disappearing into shadowy vaults, a child who kept shifting appearance every time I tried to look at her directly. I reached for my phone before my feet hit the floor, dialing Samantha. "You're prompt," she answered, sounding far too alert for the early hour. "I'm guessing you didn't sleep much either." "What did you find?" I asked, bypassing pleasantries. "A ghost story," Samantha replied. "And a money trail that would make a money launderer envious. Can you access your secure email?" I reached for my laptop. "Give me a minute." After entering 3 separate passwords and a biometric scan, I accessed the encrypted email server my firm used for sensitive communications. "I'm in. Check your inbox." I've sent over the preliminary findings, but here's the headline. Emmeline Holdings, LLC. It owns properties worth approximately $15 million across New York, with another $3 million in liquid assets spread across various accounts. The beneficial owner? On paper, it's a trust established for the benefit of Emma Walsh. Emma Walsh, I repeated, the name landing like a stone in my stomach. So there is a real Emma. That's where it gets interesting, Samantha continued. I can find no birth certificate, no school records, no medical records, nothing to suggest this person exists. But the trust is very real and very well funded. Monthly deposits ranging from $1,800 to $3,200, exactly matching the amounts you mentioned, plus substantial annual bonuses coinciding with Richard's year-end compensation payouts. I opened her email, scanning the attached documents, bank statements, property records, trust documents. Who controls the trust? Dual trustees, Richard Winters and Victoria Walsh. They both have signatory authority, but withdrawals over $10,000 require both signatures. And where does the money go? I asked, my heart pounding as I scrolled through transaction records. That's the real question, Samantha said, her voice dropping slightly. Some goes to maintenance of the properties, some to various investment accounts, but there are regular withdrawals, $8,000 to $12,000 monthly, going to an account in the Cayman Islands. That's where my visibility ends, at least for now. I'd need subpoena power to go further. Or a really good hacker, I muttered. I didn't. Hear that? Samantha replied, but I could hear the smile in her voice. There's one more thing, Meredith. Richard isn't the only one making deposits into this trust. My fingers froze over the keyboard. What do you mean? Over the past decade, there have been at least 7 other regular contributors, with amounts ranging from $1,500 to $5,000 monthly. Most contributions lasted 2 to 3 years before stopping. Currently, besides Richard, there are 2 active contributors. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He's running a scheme, I whispered, with multiple victims. That would be my assessment, Samantha agreed. And based on the timing of when payments begin and end, it appears that Richard and Victoria have been running this operation for at least 12 years. 12 years. 2 years before he met me. I closed my eyes, remembering how Richard had described meeting me as the luckiest moment of his life. Now I understood why. He'd found a wealthy attorney whose punishing work schedule meant she'd never have time to look too closely at their finances. There's one other anomaly, Samantha continued. Starting 3 years ago, there have been significant withdrawals from the trust on the 15th of each month, $25,000 like clockwork. The funds are transferred to a private account at First Caribbean International Bank in Grand Cayman, held in the name of someone called Marcus Winters. Marcus Winters? I repeated, the name unfamiliar. Any relation to Richard? That's for you to tell me. The account was opened with a Bahamian passport, but I couldn't access the supporting documentation. My mind raced through possibilities. Richard doesn't have family he's close to. Both parents deceased, no siblings that he's ever mentioned. I paused, a disturbing thought forming. Could Richard have a second identity? It's not unheard of, Samantha said. Especially if he's running some kind of long-term fraud scheme. A backup identity would give him an escape route. I glanced at the clock, 6:15 a.m. Still hours before my noon confrontation with Richard. Samantha, I need everything you can find on Marcus Winters, and I need to know if Richard has been making travel arrangements, flights, hotels, anything that might indicate he's planning to run. I'll get on it. And Meredith, be careful. If we're right about this, Richard isn't just a cheating husband. He's a professional con man with a lot to lose if he's exposed. After ending the call, I showered and dressed with meticulous care, selecting a charcoal Armani suit that Richard once said made me look intimidatingly competent. My armor for the battle ahead. As I applied my makeup, I studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me appeared composed, professional, even formidable. No one would guess that beneath that exterior, rage and hurt were battling for supremacy. Good. Richard had always been able to read me too easily. Today, I needed to be unreadable. By 7:30, I was in my car heading toward the office, the early hour ensuring light traffic. I needed the quiet sanctuary of my corner office to process what I'd learned and prepare for Richard's arrival. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system, Claire calling earlier than usual. Ms. Kincaid, I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I thought you should know. Mr. Winters came by the office last night after you left. Security let him up since he's still on the approved visitor list. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What did he want? He said he needed to retrieve some personal items he'd left in your office months ago. Security followed protocol and escorted him. But I wanted you to know. So Richard had been snooping, first at our condo, now at my office. He was trying to figure out what I knew. Thank you, Claire. Please have security remove Mr. Winters from the approved visitor list immediately. And when you get in, I need you to check my office thoroughly. Make sure nothing is missing or added. Added, ma'am. Just check carefully. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, the office was still largely empty, only early bird associates and the cleaning staff present. Claire was already at her desk, ever efficient. I've checked your office, she reported, following me inside. Nothing seems disturbed, but there was this. She handed me a small velvet box. I recognized it immediately. The box that had contained the sapphire cufflinks I'd given Richard. The same set I'd found one half of in our bedroom last night. Where was it? On your desk, right in the center. Security confirmed Mr. Winters placed it there himself. A message, then. I opened the box and found, as expected, a single platinum and sapphire cufflink, the mate to the one I'd found at home. Tucked underneath it was a small folded note in Richard's distinctive handwriting. Let's end this amicably. For old times' sake. Old times. As if the decade we'd spent together was some fond memory to be nostalgically revisited rather than a calculated deception. Claire, I need you to do something else for me. Contact building security and request footage from the executive floor elevators and hallway from last night starting around when I left. Have them send it directly to my secure email. Right away, Ms. Kincaid. She paused at the door. Is everything all right? I met her concerned gaze. Claire had been my assistant for 7 years. She'd witnessed the entirety of my marriage to Richard, had organized our anniversary celebrations, had selected his birthday gifts when I was too swamped with cases to shop. She deserved some explanation. No, Claire, everything is not all right. But it will be after I meet with Richard at noon. I hesitated, then added, whatever you hear today, whatever happens, I need your absolute discretion. Of course, she said without hesitation. You've always had that. After she left, I unlocked my desk drawer and retrieved the leather portfolio I'd prepared the night before. To it, I added printouts of Samantha's findings, organizing everything chronologically, the elaborate construction of a decade-long fraud, piece by damning piece. My desk phone rang, the private line again. You're in early, Martin noted when I answered. So are you. Occupational hazard of getting older. Can't sleep past 5 a.m. anymore. He paused. Security called me, said Richard was here last night. Of course they'd called Martin. As founding partner, any unusual activity would be reported to him. He was, I confirmed, apparently returning personal items. At 11:45 p.m.? Seems odd. Everything about Richard is turning out to be odd, Martin. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. That bad, huh? Another pause. Need backup for your meeting with him today? I blinked in surprise. How did you... Claire might be devoted to you, but she also knows when something needs escalation. She didn't give details, just mentioned you had a confidential noon meeting with Richard that had you working until midnight. I made a mental note to give Claire a substantial bonus. Her discretion was matched only by her good judgment. I appreciate the offer, but I need to handle this myself. I figured you'd say that. Just remember what I told you last night. You've got allies, Meredith. Whatever he's done, you're not facing it alone. After hanging up, I turned to my computer and found the security footage Claire had requested. I watched as Richard entered the executive floor at 11:43 p.m., moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. He spoke briefly with the night security guard, who nodded and escorted him to my office. The footage showed them entering, then Richard emerging alone 3 minutes later, the guard waiting in the hallway. Richard's expression was unreadable as he headed back toward the elevators. But there was something in his posture, a tension, a watchfulness, that struck me as uncharacteristic. I played the footage again, this time focusing on his hands. He entered my office empty-handed but left with his right hand in his pocket. What had he taken? My eyes swept over my office, the bookshelves lined with legal texts, the credenza with its carefully arranged photos, now minus any featuring Richard, the filing cabinets containing active case files. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed. My computer chimed with an incoming email from Samantha. Marcus Winters exists. Bahamian passport issued 9 years ago, renewed last year. Regular travel between New York and Grand Cayman, most recently, 3 weeks ago. Maintains a permanent residence at the Residences at Seafire, a luxury condo development in Grand Cayman. Property purchased 7 years ago for $3.2 million, paid in full, no mortgage. As for Richard's travel plans, he has a reservation at the Carlisle Hotel for tonight, and a first-class ticket to Grand Cayman departing tomorrow at 11:35 a.m. Ticket purchased yesterday evening at 11:58 p.m. Cash. Whatever you're planning for. Noon, you might want to step up your timeline. This looks like a man preparing to run. My heart pounded as the implications registered. Richard hadn't been returning cufflinks last night. He'd been in my office looking for evidence of what I knew, then immediately booked a flight to Grand Cayman once he left, likely to access whatever funds he had stored there as Marcus Winters before disappearing permanently. I checked the time, 8:45 a.m. Richard wouldn't expect me to contact him before our scheduled noon meeting. I had the element of surprise, but only if I moved now. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Detective Santiago. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. James, it's Meredith Kincaid. A pause, then a chuckle. Well, the attorney who made me look like an idiot in the Fisher case. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I need your help, I said, swallowing my pride. The Fisher case had been ugly. I'd represented a client accused of fraud, and Santiago had been the lead detective. I'd won by discrediting his investigation, a victory that still left a sour taste given what I now suspected about my client's guilt. Must be serious if you're calling me, Santiago noted. What's going on? I need to know if there's an active investigation into Richard Winters or Victoria Walsh, possibly involving financial fraud. Another pause, longer this time. Why are you asking, counselor? Because Richard is my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and I have reason to believe he's been running a sophisticated fraud scheme for at least 12 years. Possibly with multiple victims. Jesus, Kincaid. Santiago's tone shifted from suspicious to concerned. You're not involved, are you? No, but I'm afraid I might be one of the victims. The admission cost me, but pride had no place in this conversation. I've uncovered evidence suggesting he's created a fictional child to justify extracting regular payments from multiple individuals, possibly under false pretenses. That would be wire fraud if it crosses state lines, Santiago said, his detective, mind engaging with the problem. Possibly racketeering if there's a pattern. Where's the money going? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Some is being funneled through an LLC called Emmeline Holdings to properties around New York. Some is going to a Cayman Islands account held by someone called Marcus Winters, who I suspect might be Richard operating under an alias. He has a flight booked to Grand Cayman tomorrow morning. Shit, Santiago muttered. Listen, I can't confirm or deny any ongoing investigations, you know that. But hypothetically, if someone was looking into an operation matching what you've described, they'd be very interested in speaking with you. My breath caught. So there is an investigation. Hypothetically, Santiago emphasized, such an investigation might be in its early stages, gathering evidence before moving to arrests. And hypothetically, if someone involved in such a scheme was planning to flee the jurisdiction, that might accelerate the timeline considerably. I'm meeting with Richard at noon today, I said. He thinks I've discovered something about his fictional daughter Emma, but he doesn't know the full extent of what I've uncovered. Don't tip your hand, Santiago warned. If he's been running a scheme this long, he's dangerous, Kincaid. These types don't like being cornered. I can handle Richard, I said with more confidence than I felt. Maybe, but I'd feel better if you weren't handling him alone. He paused, and I could practically hear him thinking. Tell you what, give me your office address. I'll have someone nearby, just in case. I provided my office details, then added, one more thing, Santiago. If there is an investigation, I want immunity. I didn't know anything about this until yesterday, but I need assurance I won't be dragged into it legally. That's not my call to make, he replied, but I'll pass it along to the appropriate parties. For what it's worth, based on our history, I believe you. You're a lot of things, Kincaid, but stupid isn't one of them. You wouldn't have been involved in something like this knowingly. Coming from Santiago, that was high praise indeed. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, processing. This new information, an active investigation, explained why Richard was suddenly fleeing. Had he been tipped off? Or had my request for the DNA test set off alarm bells, making him worry his scheme was about to unravel? My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. I'm finishing up some work. We'll be there at noon as agreed. Lies upon lies. According to Samantha, he'd checked into the Carlisle last night. He wasn't finishing work. He was preparing to disappear. I texted back, looking forward to it, letting him believe I was still operating on his timeline. My intercom buzzed. Ms. Kincaid, your 9:30 is here, Claire announced. For a moment, I stared at the intercom in confusion. I didn't recall scheduling. Any meetings for this morning? My 9:30? I repeated. Yes, Detective Reynolds from the Financial Crimes Task Force. He said you're expecting him? Santiago had moved quickly. I glanced at my reflection in the small mirror I kept in my desk drawer, ensuring my composure was firmly in place. Send. Him in, Claire. Detective Reynolds was not what I expected. Instead of the rumpled, overworked appearance common to NYPD detectives, he wore a crisp navy suit that rivaled the bespoke creations favored by the firm's senior partners. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, his posture military straight. Ms. Kincaid, he said, offering his hand. Thank you for making time for me on short notice. I gestured to the visitor chair across from my desk. I gather Santiago contacted you. He did. Reynolds settled into the chair, his expression neutral. He mentioned you might have information pertinent to an ongoing investigation. Before we continue, I said, meeting his gaze directly. I need to know where I stand. Am I a witness, a person of interest, or a potential defendant? Reynolds's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Direct. Santiago said you would be. He leaned forward slightly. At this point, Ms. Kincaid, you're a potential witness. Whether that changes depends on what you tell me next. I nodded, then opened the leather portfolio I'd prepared. I believe my husband, Richard Winters, and his associate Victoria Walsh have been running a sophisticated fraud scheme for at least 12 years, possibly longer. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The DNA test proving Richard wasn't Emma's father. The death of Catherine Walsh 12 years ago. The creation of Emmeline Holdings. The pattern of monthly payments from multiple contributors. The properties owned by the LLC. The Cayman Islands account. And Richard's imminent flight plans. Reynolds listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small black notebook. When I finished, he closed the notebook and studied me carefully. You realize, he said finally, that what you're describing matches the operational structure of what we call a black money scheme. It's a sophisticated variant of a traditional confidence scheme, where the perpetrator creates a fictional obligation, in this case a child, to extract regular payments from victims who believe they're fulfilling a moral or legal responsibility. And Richard has been running this scheme the entire time we've been together, I said, the reality of it still difficult to fully absorb. Based on the timeline you've provided? Yes. Reynolds paused. What I'm about to tell you is not public information, Ms. Kincaid. We've been investigating Richard Winters and Victoria Walsh for approximately 9 months, after one of their previous marks became suspicious and contacted authorities. Previous marks, I repeated, the clinical terminology making my stomach twist. How many have there been? We've identified 7 individuals who have made regular payments to the Emma Walsh Trust over the past 12 years. In each case, the pattern is similar. Richard or Victoria establishes a relationship with the mark, eventually revealing the existence of Emma and the financial obligation. The mark begins making payments, which continue until the relationship ends. In several cases, the payments continued long after the relationship concluded, just like with me. I thought of the $300,000 Richard had extracted from our joint finances over the past decade, all under the guise of supporting a child who didn't exist. Who is Marcus Winters? I asked. Reynolds's expression tightened slightly. We believe Marcus Winters is an alias used by Richard to access funds offshore. The passport was obtained using fraudulent documentation, specifically a modified copy of Richard's own birth certificate listing a different name. And the regular $25,000 monthly withdrawals going to Marcus Winters' account. That's what we're still investigating. Those withdrawals began 3 years ago, coinciding with the purchase of an additional property in Grand Cayman and the establishment of a new bank account in Zurich. My mind raced, putting the pieces together. He's preparing for an exit, stockpiling funds offshore, establishing a new identity, acquiring property outside U.S. jurisdiction. Reynolds nodded. That's our assessment as well, which is why your information about his travel plans is particularly valuable. We've been building our case methodically, but if he's planning to flee, you need to move now. I finished for him. Exactly. Which brings me to your meeting with him at noon. You want me to cancel it? I guessed, disappointment flooding through me. After everything Richard had done, I needed, to confront him myself. Actually, no, Reynolds said, surprising me. We want it to proceed, but with modifications. Cold certainty settled over me. You want me to wear a wire. We need Richard to incriminate himself on tape, to acknowledge the scheme, the fictional child, the multiple victims. With your testimony and the financial evidence we've gathered, we could eventually make a case, but a recorded confession would be invaluable. I considered the proposal, weighing my desire for personal confrontation against the greater goal of seeing Richard held accountable for his crimes. If I do this, I said carefully, I want guarantees, written assurance that I won't be implicated in any way, and access to all evidence related to funds taken from our joint accounts. I intend to pursue full restitution. Reynolds nodded. That can be arranged. We'll need to brief you on how to direct the conversation. Specific questions that will elicit the most legally damaging responses. I'm a trial attorney detective. I know how to ask questions that incriminate. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. So Santiago mentioned, there's one more thing you should know, Ms. Kincaid. Victoria Walsh was picked up this morning attempting to board a flight to Bermuda. She's currently being questioned, but so far she's refusing to cooperate without her attorney present. So, Victoria had tried to run too. It confirmed my suspicion that something had triggered their exit strategy, likely my request for the DNA test. Does Richard know she's been detained? Not yet. We were hoping to use that as leverage during your conversation. I checked the time, 10:15 a.m., less than 2 hours until Richard would arrive, thinking he was managing a minor complication with his soon-to-be ex-wife, unaware he was walking into a trap of his own making. I'll do it, I decided. Tell me what you need. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. A female technician from the Financial Crimes Task Force fitted me with a wire, a device far more sophisticated than the clunky versions depicted in procedural dramas. A nearly invisible transmitter adhered to my skin beneath my left breast. with a microphone smaller than a shirt button concealed in my lapel pin, a diamond pavé sun I'd worn since making partner. It was one of the few pieces of jewelry I owned that Richard hadn't given me. Testing, the technician murmured, watching levels on a small tablet. Perfect. Crystal clear. Detective Reynolds stood nearby, reviewing the questions they needed me to ask Richard. The priority is getting him to acknowledge the scheme explicitly. We need him to confirm that Emma doesn't exist, that the payments were fraudulent, and ideally, that there were multiple victims. I understand, I said, surprised by my own calm. The initial shock had given way to a cold, clarifying anger that sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. What about Victoria? She's still being questioned. Her attorney arrived about 20 minutes ago. Reynolds checked his watch. At this point, we're treating her as a co-conspirator, but that could change depending on what we learn from your conversation with Richard. My desk phone buzzed. Claire, announcing that Martin wanted to see me. I glanced at Reynolds, who nodded. His permission. Send him in, I told Claire. Martin entered, his shrewd gaze taking in Reynolds and the technician before settling on me. I see you have company. Martin, this is Detective Reynolds from the Financial Crimes Task Force. Detective, this is Martin Blackwell, founding partner of the firm. The men exchanged brief nods, sizing each other up with the wariness of natural adversaries, cop and defense attorney, despite being on the same side in this particular matter. I need a moment with my partner, Martin said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Reynolds gathered his materials. We'll continue our preparations in the conference room down the hall. Ms. Kincaid, we need to be ready by 11:45 at the latest. After they left, Martin closed the door and fixed me with the penetrating stare that had made him legendary in courtrooms across the country. Financial Crimes Task Force, he said slowly. Want to tell me what's going on? I hesitated, bound by the confidentiality Reynolds had requested, but Martin deserved some explanation. Richard is under investigation. That's all I can say right now. Martin's eyebrows shot up. Richard? For what? Financial fraud, possibly wire fraud, racketeering, and a host of other charges. I met his gaze steadily. I'm cooperating with the investigation. Martin let out a low whistle, dropping into the chair across from me. Jesus, Meredith, how long have you known? Since yesterday. I gave him a condensed version of my discovery, the DNA test, the fictional child, the shell. Company, the missing funds. Martin listened without interruption, his expression darkening with each new detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. I knew he was a bastard, he finally said. But this... He shook his head. Are you sure you want to be involved in this, Meredith? The firm can provide you with representation, distance you from... I need to do this, Martin, I interrupted. For 10 years, I lived with his lies. I need to be the one to confront him. Martin studied me, concern evident in his eyes. And afterward? Have you thought about what comes next? This will be in the papers, Meredith. Prominent attorney's husband arrested in fraud scheme. The vultures will circle. I hadn't considered the publicity angle, too focused on Richard's betrayal and the mechanics of the investigation. Martin was right. This would become public, likely in the most sensationalistic way possible. I can handle it, I said, more confidently than I felt. I know you can, Martin replied, but you don't have to handle it alone. He reached across the desk, covering my hand with his, a rare gesture of physical comfort from a man known for his emotional reserve. Take some time off after this. Go somewhere quiet. When you're ready to come back, your cases will be waiting. And so will I. The unexpected kindness threatened to crack my carefully maintained composure. I swallowed hard. Thank you, Martin. He withdrew his hand, reverting to his usual brisk manner. Now, what do you need from me for this operation with the detectives? Just keep everyone away from my office until it's over. No interruptions, no matter what. Martin nodded, rising to leave. At the door, he paused. Meredith? Nail the bastard? A ghost of a smile touched my lips. That's the plan. After Martin left, I returned to the conference room where Reynolds and his team were waiting. The technician ran a final check on the wire, confirming everything was operational. Reynolds reviewed the signal they'd use if they needed to enter the room, 3 quick taps on my desk if I felt threatened, or if Richard confessed to additional crimes they hadn't anticipated. Remember, Reynolds said, let him talk. The more comfortable he feels, the more likely he is to incriminate himself. If he starts to get suspicious, redirect to the DNA test. That seems to be his vulnerable point. At 11:40, we returned to my office to await Richard's arrival. Reynolds and a second detective would be monitoring from the adjacent conference room, which had been cleared of staff under the pretense of a sensitive client meeting. At 11:55, Claire's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Kincaid, Mr. Winters is here to see you. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Send him in. Richard entered with the confident stride I'd once found so attractive, dressed impeccably in a slate gray suit I recognized, one I'd helped him select last year at Barney's, paying for it with my own credit card. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of concern tinged with exasperation, the look of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable woman. Meredith, he began, closing the door behind him. I hope this meeting means you're ready to be sensible about our divorce proceedings. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Have a seat, Richard. He settled into the chair, crossing one leg over the other in a posture of relaxed control. Your text about the DNA test was concerning. I'm not sure what game you're playing. But it's not a game, I interrupted, sliding the test results across the desk. These came back yesterday. They show conclusively that you have a 0% probability of being Emma's biological father. Richard glanced at the document, his expression never faltering. And this is relevant because for 10 years you've claimed to be paying child support for a daughter who, according to this, cannot possibly be yours. I kept my voice even, watching him carefully. That raises some questions. DNA tests can be flawed, Richard Tommy said dismissively. Samples can be contaminated, results misinterpreted. This test was conducted by one of the most reputable genetic testing facilities in the country, I countered, and it confirms what I suspected after I learned that Catherine Walsh died 12 years ago. The first crack in his facade, a slight tightening around his eyes, so subtle anyone else might have missed it. But I'd studied Richard's expressions for a decade. I knew every nuance of his face. I'm not sure what you think you've discovered, he said, his tone cooler now. But if you're suggesting I've been dishonest about my obligations to Emma doesn't exist, Richard. The words hung between us, heavy with accusation. Richard's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a tensing of shoulders, a recalculation occurring behind his eyes. That's absurd, he said finally. I've shown you pictures. I've taken you to her dance recital. You showed me pictures of a blonde child who could have been anyone, and that dance recital was at a performing arts school where you claimed photography wasn't allowed. Convenient, in retrospect. Richard uncrossed his legs, leaning forward slightly. Meredith, I understand you're hurt by our separation. But these accusations— Tell me about Emmeline Holdings, I interrupted. This time the reaction was unmistakable, a flash of shock quickly masked by confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because Emmeline Holdings owns 6 properties across New York, including a luxury apartment in Tribeca where Victoria Walsh currently resides. The same Victoria Walsh whose sister Catherine supposedly gave birth to Emma before dying 12 years ago. Richard's jaw tightened. You've been investigating me. I've been discovering the truth, I corrected. Like the fact that you've been making monthly payments ranging from $1,800 to $3,200 for the past decade, supposedly for child support. But instead of going to child care, these funds have been funneled through the Emma Walsh Trust, controlled by you and Victoria, into real estate investments and offshore accounts. Richard stood abruptly, straightening his jacket. I don't have to listen to this. These wild accusations. Sit down, Richard, I said, my voice like ice. We're just getting started. To my surprise, he complied, though his expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before, calculating, cold, almost predatory. The mask of the charming, somewhat harried attorney had slipped, revealing the con man beneath. What exactly do you want, Meredith? Money? Is that it? You're trying to extort a better settlement? I want the truth, I said simply. I want you to tell me about the scheme you've been running with Victoria. How you create a fictional child to extract regular payments from your marks. How you've done this to at least 7 other people before me. His eyes narrowed. Who have you been talking to? I ignored the question. How does it work, Richard? Do you and Victoria identify targets together? Or do you handle that part while she manages the financial side? The Emma Walsh Trust is quite an elaborate construction for a child who doesn't exist. This conversation is over, Richard said, rising again. My attorney will be in touch about your slanderous accusations. Victoria was arrested this morning, I said quietly. Richard froze, his hand halfway to the door handle. What did you say? Victoria Walsh was detained at JFK attempting to board a flight to Bermuda. She's being questioned by the Financial Crimes Task Force as we speak. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. They know everything, Richard. The scheme, the offshore accounts, Marcus Winters, all of it. The transformation was remarkable. In an instant, the last vestiges of the Richard the Foy thought I knew vanished, replaced by a stranger whose cold calculation made my skin crawl. What do you want? He asked again, his voice now devoid of pretense. I told you. The truth. He returned to the chair, his movements deliberate. The truth, he repeated, a bitter smile twisting his lips. You wouldn't recognize the truth if it slapped you in the face, Meredith. For a supposedly brilliant attorney, you've been remarkably blind. Then enlighten me, I challenged, feeling the wire against my skin, knowing that every word was being recorded. Tell me about Emma. Richard studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Emma was conceptual, he finally said. A useful fiction. So there never was a child. No, there never was a child. He admitted it so easily, without a hint of remorse. Catherine Walsh was real enough, a paralegal at my first firm. She died of an aneurysm 12 years ago. Tragic, really, but useful. Useful how? Her death created an opportunity. Her sister Victoria and I were close at the time. We realized Catherine's death could be leveraged into something profitable. The fictional daughter was Victoria's idea, a way to create an ongoing obligation that wouldn't raise suspicions. And the child support payments? Richard shrugged. People don't question child support. It's a socially protected expense. No one asks to see the receipts or demands proof the child exists. They just accept it. So you and Victoria created this scheme together, I pressed, needing him to explicitly acknowledge the conspiracy, targeting individuals and extracting regular payments under false pretenses. I prefer to think of it as creating mutually beneficial relationships with certain parameters. Richard's composure had returned, along with a hint of the arrogance I'd once mistaken for confidence. The partners received companionship, social status, even love in some cases. In exchange, they contributed to a trust fund. A simple transaction. Fraud isn't a simple transaction, Richard. Is it fraud if everyone gets what they want? He countered. You got the husband you needed, someone presentable, educated, who understood your world and didn't threaten your precious career. I got financial security and access to your social circles. The arrangement worked for both of us. Except it was built on lies, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. You invented a child. You fabricated an obligation. You stole from me, from all of us. Stole? Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Meredith, in the decade we were together, you made over $15 million. The $300,000 that went to the trust was a fraction of your earnings. Money you never missed because you were too busy billing 80 hours a week to notice. He leaned forward. If anything, you got a bargain. Other partners contributed. Far more, relative to their means. Other partners, I repeated, seizing the opening. How many were there, Richard? How many people have you and Victoria defrauded this way? He hesitated, seeming to realize he'd said too much. That's not relevant. How many? I insisted. Including you? 8. He said it with a touch of pride, as if revealing an impressive accomplishment. 8 successful professionals who were too busy, too trusting, or too desperate for connection to look too closely at the details. And the properties owned by Emmeline Holdings? Investment vehicles. The profits from those properties have been substantial. Victoria has quite an eye for real estate. And Marcus Winters? Who is he? For the first time, Richard looked genuinely surprised. You've been thorough, he murmured. Marcus is insurance. A contingency plan, in case things ever went sideways. Like they have now, I noted. Exactly. Like they have now. Richard's gaze hardened. Though I admit, I didn't expect the complication to come from you. You were always so predictable, so focused on your career that you never looked up to see what was happening right under your nose. The casual cruelty of his assessment stung, all the more because it contained a grain of truth. I had been focused on my career, had trusted Richard to handle his side of our life together, had never questioned the narrative he'd constructed. The monthly withdrawals of $25,000 to Marcus Winters' account in Grand Cayman, I continued, pushing past the hurt. What were those for? Richard's eyes narrowed. You really have been busy. Those funds were for future security. A nest egg, if you will. For your escape, I translated. You've been planning your exit for years. Planning for contingencies, he corrected. A skill you should appreciate, counselor. And Victoria? Was she always part of the plan, or just a convenient accomplice? Something flickered across Richard's face, a genuine emotion I couldn't quite identify. Victoria and I have an understanding. She manages the financial side. I handle the relationship aspects. We're partners. Partners in crime, I clarified. Richard sighed, suddenly looking weary. Call it what you want, Meredith. The fact is, it worked, for years, because it gave people what they needed, even you. What I needed, I said slowly, was honesty, a real partnership, not a calculation designed to extract money from me under false pretenses. And yet, Richard countered, until 3 months ago, you were perfectly content with our arrangement. You had the husband you wanted, the career you prioritized, and the social standing that mattered to you. The only difference between you and the others was durability. 10 years is our record, by the way. Most relationships in our program last 2 to 3 years. Program, I repeated, disgusted. Is that what you call it? Victoria prefers long-term strategic relationships. But yes, we developed certain protocols over time. Parameters for target selection, relationship management, financial extraction, and eventually, dissolution. And what triggered the dissolution phase with me? I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. Why end things after 10 years? Richard studied me, as if deciding whether to be honest. Several factors. Your promotion to senior partner last year substantially increased your workload, making you less available and more distracted. Ideal conditions for transition. The Emma narrative was reaching its natural conclusion. Fictional children eventually grow up, making monthly support less justifiable. And finally, we reached our financial target for your particular relationship. Financial target, I echoed. You had a specific amount in mind. Each relationship has metrics. When those metrics are achieved, we implement exit strategies. The clinical detachment with which he described reducing human connections to business transactions made my stomach turn. This man had shared my bed, my home, my life for a decade. And the entire time I'd been nothing more than a spreadsheet calculation to him. Was any of it real? I asked, hating the vulnerability in the question but needing to know. In 10 years, was there ever a moment when you actually cared? Richard hesitated, something almost like regret crossing his features. Would it matter if I said yes? It might. He considered this, then shook his head. In my line of work, sentiment is a liability. Victoria and I learned that early on. The moment you start believing your own performance is the moment you make mistakes. Like the mistake of assuming I wouldn't investigate a suspicious DNA test. Result? I suggested. A rueful smile touched his lips. Exactly like that. Though in my defense, you've never shown much interest in Emma before. The DNA test was unexpected. What triggered your exit plan now? You weren't planning to leave 3 months ago. We were discussing vacation plans for the summer. Victoria received information that we were potentially under investigation. A former partner had become suspicious, started asking questions. It was time to activate our contingency plans. Marcus Winters, I said, among other measures. Richard glanced at his watch, the Patek Philippe I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. I assume, given this conversation, that my flight tomorrow will be complicated. You could say that, I agreed. He nodded, resignation settling over his features. I suspected as much when Victoria didn't check in this morning. We have protocols for that as well. Richard, I said, leaning forward, I need you to be very clear about something. The Emma Walsh Trust, the monthly payments from multiple partners, the offshore accounts. This was all part of a deliberate fraud scheme orchestrated by you and Victoria, correct? He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that caught me off guard. You're wearing a wire, aren't you? He shook his head, still smiling. Of course you are. Always the methodical attorney, building your case one admission at a time. I didn't deny it. Answer the question, Richard. He sighed, straightening his already perfect tie. Yes, Meredith. The Emma Walsh Trust was created to facilitate the systematic extraction of funds from selected individuals under false pretenses, using a fictional child as justification for regular payments. Victoria and I have operated this venture for approximately 12 years, with 8 primary targets during that period. The funds were invested in real estate and offshore accounts to maximize returns and minimize detection. His tone was clinical, almost bored. Is that explicit enough for your law enforcement friends who are undoubtedly listening right now? I fought to keep my expression neutral, though inside I was reeling from his casual confession. Why are you telling me this? Because it doesn't matter anymore, he said simply. Victoria's arrest means the operation is compromised. My contingency plans are known. And frankly, Meredith, after 10 years together, you deserve at least one honest conversation between us. The intercom buzzed, startling us both. Ms. Kincaid. Claire's voice came through, sounding strained. There's an urgent call from Detective Reynolds. He says it's regarding Victoria Walsh. Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I pressed the intercom button. Put him through, Claire. My desk phone. Rang immediately. I answered on speaker, maintaining eye contact with Richard. Detective Reynolds, you're on speaker with Richard Winters and myself. Ms. Kincaid. Reynolds' voice was tense. We have a situation. Victoria Walsh escaped custody approximately 20 minutes ago. We have officers in pursuit, but I wanted to alert you immediately. Richard's expression changed instantly, shock giving way to calculation. That's not possible, he said, more to himself than to us. Mr. Winters, Reynolds continued, we have officers en route to Ms. Kincaid's office now. Please remain where you are until they arrive. Richard stood, straightening his jacket. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Detective. Before I could react, he reached into his inner suit pocket and withdrew a small object, a glass vial containing clear liquid. Richard, I said cautiously, what is that? Insurance, he replied, his voice eerily calm. Victoria and I always have contingency plans, Meredith. Always. I pressed my palm against the desk 3 times in rapid succession, the signal to Reynolds that I needed immediate assistance. Whatever you're thinking, it's not worth it, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through me. The building is surrounded. Victoria won't get far. This ends today. This particular chapter ends today, Richard corrected, holding the vial carefully. But Victoria and I planned for this possibility years ago. You might be surprised at what's possible with adequate preparation. The door to my office burst open, Reynolds and 2 officers entering with weapons drawn. Put it down, Winters, Reynolds commanded, his gun aimed at Richard's chest. Richard smiled, a genuine expression that chilled me more than any threat could have. Meredith, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I won't insult your intelligence by claiming I ever loved you, but I will say this. Of all our partners, you were by far the most interesting. With a swift motion, he removed the cap from the vial and downed its contents before anyone could react. Secure him! Reynolds shouted as officers rushed forward, but Richard raised his hands in surrender, still smiling. No need for dramatics, he said calmly. It's not poison, Detective. Just a little chemical cocktail that will render me unconscious in approximately 60 seconds. Long enough to say goodbye, but not long enough for you to extract any further information. He turned back to me, his gaze steady. Goodbye, Meredith. I'd say it's been a pleasure, but... His eyelids began to droop, his speech slowing. We've had enough lies. Richard crumpled to the floor as the officers reached him, catching him before his head hit the ground. Reynolds immediately called for medical assistance while the officers checked Richard's vital signs. He's alive, one reported. Pulse steady but slowing. I stood frozen behind my desk, watching as the man I'd called my husband for a decade was handcuffed despite his unconscious state, as medical personnel rushed in with a gurney, as Reynolds barked orders about hospital security and round-the-clock monitoring. Through it all, I remained motionless, my mind racing to process what had just happened. Richard's confession, Victoria's escape, the revelation that our entire relationship had been nothing more than a carefully orchestrated fraud. Ms. Kincaid? Reynolds approached, his expression concerned. Are you all right? I nodded mechanically, unable to find my voice. We got what we needed, he assured me. His confession was crystal clear. Conspiracy, fraud, multiple victims. Even if Victoria remains at large, Richard Winters won't be going anywhere except prison once he regains consciousness. What was in the vial? I finally managed to ask. We won't know for certain until tox screens come back, but based on his symptoms, likely a sedative compound, something that would render him unconscious but not cause permanent damage. As he said, enough time to say goodbye without risking further interrogation. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. He planned for this. He knew that if one of them was caught, the other would need time to... What? Implement some final contingency plan. That's our working theory, Reynolds confirmed. But with Richard in custody and Victoria's identity flagged at every border crossing, airport, and train station in the country, I don't like their odds. He hesitated, then added, I know this has been difficult. Once the medical team removes Richard, We'll need to take your formal statement. But after that, you're free to go. An officer will be assigned to you for the next 48 hours as a precaution. You think Victoria might come after me? The thought hadn't even occurred to me, still reeling from Richard's betrayal. It's unlikely, but possible. Victoria Walsh has just lost everything: her freedom, her partner, access to their assets. People in that situation can be unpredictable. As the medical team wheeled Richard out on a gurney, I watched the face of the man I'd shared my life with disappear through the door of my office for the final time. In that moment, I realized that Richard had been right about one thing. I had been blind, not just to his deception, but to how completely I had allowed my work to become a shield against genuine intimacy. 10 years with a man who had seen me as nothing more than a financial target. 10 years of believing I had a partnership when I'd merely been part of a program. The humiliation was almost as painful as the betrayal. He said I was their record, I told Reynolds, the absurdity of it suddenly striking me. 10 years. Longer than any of their other targets. I laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. I suppose that's something. Reynolds regarded me with unexpected compassion. For what it's worth, Ms. Kincaid, your cooperation today has ensured that Richard Winters won't be able to do this to anyone else. That counts for a lot in my book. Small consolation, but I appreciated the sentiment. As my office emptied of law enforcement personnel, leaving only a female officer to take my statement, Martin appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction. He's been arrested? He confirmed, looking to the officer for verification. Yes, sir, she replied. Though currently he's en route to the hospital under guard. Martin turned to me. You did it. We did it, I corrected, suddenly grateful for his steady presence. I couldn't have managed this without your support. He waved away my gratitude. I simply kept people away from your door. You did the hard part. He glanced at the officer. How much longer will you need her today? Just a formal statement, sir. Shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. Martin nodded. Good. When you're done, Meredith, I've arranged for a car to take you anywhere you want to go. Home, hotel, airport, your choice. The thought of returning to the condo Richard and I had shared was unbearable, but the alternative, a sterile hotel room where I would be alone with my thoughts, seemed equally impossible. Thank you, Martin. I'll decide after I've given my statement. As he turned to leave, a thought occurred to me. Martin? The real estate agent I contacted about the Riverside Boulevard penthouse. Could you have her meet me there this evening instead of this weekend? I'd like to see it today. He nodded, understanding immediately. I'll arrange it. You need a fresh start. Somewhere without ghosts. As he left, I turned back to the officer, ready to provide my statement, to officially document how thoroughly I had been deceived by the man I called husband. But even as I recounted the details of Richard's confession, my mind was already moving forward, calculating next steps, planning for contingencies. Richard and Victoria had taught me one valuable lesson, at least, the importance of always having a contingency plan. And I intended to make good use of that lesson in whatever came next. The Riverside Boulevard penthouse was everything the listing photos had promised. Sleek, modern, and entirely unlike the warm, traditional aesthetic Richard and I had cultivated in our shared home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Hudson River, the evening light casting long shadows across Brazilian hardwood floors. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel and white marble, untouched by any hint of domesticity. It was perfect in its impersonal luxury. As you can see, it's completely move-in ready. Jessica, the real estate agent, enthused. The previous owners relocated to London rather suddenly and left most of the furniture. They're willing to include it in the asking price. Perfect. A home stripped of its former occupants' identities, just as I was attempting to strip mine of Richard's influence. I'll take it, I said, interrupting Jessica's rehearsed spiel about the building's amenities. She blinked in surprise. "Don't you want to see the bedrooms? The master suite has an incredible spa bathroom with—" "I'm sure. It's magnificent," I said, signing the offer sheet she'd brought in anticipation of my interest. "I want a 30-day closing sooner if possible. My attorney will handle the details." I wrote a check for the earnest money, a substantial sum that would have required discussion with Richard just days ago. "Please convey to the sellers that I'm prepared to meet their asking price provided they can accommodate my timeline." Jessica's professional composure gave way to genuine excitement. This would be a significant commission with minimal effort on her part. "Of course, Ms. Kincaid. I'll submit this immediately." She hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind my asking, what about your current residence?" "It will be on the market by the end of the week," I replied, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "In fact, if your firm would like the listing, it's yours." A calculated offer, ensuring Jessica's complete commitment to expediting my purchase, while providing me with a convenient way to dispose of the condo without having to set foot in it again. The thought of packing up 10 years of life with Richard, sorting through shared possessions and memories, was unbearable. After Jessica left, giddy with her unexpected windfall, I stood alone in what would soon be my new home, watching darkness settle over the river. The bodyguard, Detective Reynolds, had insisted upon waited discreetly in the hallway, giving me the illusion of privacy while ensuring Victoria couldn't make good on any desperate revenge fantasies, should she harbor them. My phone had been buzzing steadily since Richard's arrest, calls from colleagues, friends, even a few journalists who had somehow already gotten wind of the story. I'd ignored them all, responding only to texts from Martin and Abigail, my sister, who remained blissfully unaware of the day's events. I couldn't face telling her yet, couldn't bear to see my humiliation reflected in her sympathetic eyes. A new text appeared. Samantha, the forensic accountant who'd helped unravel Richard's scheme. "Just heard about the arrest. Impressive work. If you need anything further regarding the financials, let me know. Also, should we discuss next steps for asset recovery?" Asset recovery, the clinical term for the brutal process of disentangling my finances from the web of deceit Richard had woven. I made a mental note to call Samantha tomorrow. Tonight, I needed space to process the shattered remnants of what I'd believed was my life. The penthouse's previous owners had left behind a well-stocked bar cart, another selling point in its favor. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, not bothering to add ice, and moved to the window wall. 37 floors above the city, I could almost imagine I was floating, untethered from the day's events. My phone rang again. Martin this time. "Unlike the others," I answered. "How's the penthouse?" he asked without preamble. "Perfect. I'm taking it." I sipped the scotch, savoring its peaty warmth. "Jessica's submitting my offer tonight." "Good. I've spoken with Sandra in real estate at the firm. She'll handle the closing, expedite everything." He paused. "The news about Richard has started circulating." I closed my eyes briefly. "How bad?" "Initial reports are just factual. Prominent. Attorney's husband arrested in fraud investigation. Nothing particularly sensational yet, but it's early." Another pause. "The firm is preparing a statement expressing shock and support for you. Standard crisis management." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for the shield Martin was attempting to provide. "There's something else," he continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Reynolds called. Richard regained consciousness at the hospital. He's refusing to speak further without his attorney present, but—" He hesitated. "But what, Martin?" "He's asking to see you." The request landed like a slap. After everything, the lies, the betrayal, the coldly calculated decade of deception, Richard had the audacity to request my presence? "Absolutely not," I said, the words emerging sharper than intended. "That's what I told Reynolds. Just wanted you to know." "Did Reynolds say anything about Victoria?" still at large. They've frozen all known accounts associated with Emmeline Holdings and put a watch on the Marcus Winters identity, but he didn't need to finish the thought. If Victoria had planned for this contingency as meticulously as Richard had implied, she likely had resources beyond those the authorities had identified. I appreciate the update, I said, suddenly exhausted. And everything else you've done. Today. Get some rest, Meredith. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without sleep deprivation. After hanging up, I finished my scotch and poured another, moving from the window to explore the penthouse more thoroughly. The master bedroom featured a platform bed facing another wall of windows, the cityscape creating a dramatic backdrop. The bathroom was indeed spectacular, a freestanding tub positioned to take advantage of the view, a shower large enough for 4 people, dual vanities in black marble. I found myself wondering if Richard and Victoria had properties like this in their portfolio, sleek luxury spaces designed to impress rather than comfort. Had they laughed about me behind my back, mocking my preference for the traditional brownstone aesthetic of our condo? Had there been others before me who had also been carefully studied, their tastes catalogued and catered to as part of the elaborate con? My phone buzzed with a text from the officer in the hallway. All clear on my hourly check, ma'am. We'll continue monitoring. I sent back a brief acknowledgement, then noticed the time, nearly midnight. I had been wandering the penthouse in a daze for hours, my mind cycling through the devastating revelations of the day without reaching any resolution. On impulse, I called Samantha, despite the late hour. Meredith, she answered immediately. I was hoping you'd call. Sorry about the time, I said. I've been processing. I can imagine. What do you need? Direct and practical. Exactly why I'd called her instead of anyone else who might offer sympathy I wasn't ready to receive. Asset recovery, I said. What's the process? How much of the money Richard took can I get back? Legally? Potentially? All of it, though it will take time. The funds were taken under false pretenses from joint accounts during your marriage. We have documentation of the transfers, and now you have Richard's confession. She paused. The complication is Victoria's escape. If she's managed to access any of the offshore funds before the authorities could freeze them, recovery becomes more complex. And the other victims? The 7 others Richard mentioned? Once they're identified, they would have similar legal claims. It might become a matter of proportional recovery if the total assets are insufficient to cover all losses. I thought, of the 6 properties owned by Emmeline Holdings, the offshore accounts, the investments, a significant portfolio, but perhaps not enough to make everyone whole after a decade of fraud. How would we identify the other victims? I asked, an idea beginning to form. The authorities will be working on that based on the financial records they've seized. But honestly, once this hits the news cycle, they may well come forward on their own. And if I wanted to contact them directly, before the media circus begins? Samantha was silent for a moment. Technically, the financial records I uncovered belong to you. You hired me privately. If those records contained information that led you to identify other potential victims, well, there's no legal prohibition against you reaching out. That's what I thought. My mind was suddenly clear, focused on action rather than emotion. I need you to compile a list of everyone who contributed to the Emma Walsh Trust over the past 12 years. Names, contact information, amounts, everything you can find. I can have that for you by morning, Samantha replied. May I ask what you're planning? A different kind of contingency plan, I said. One Richard and Victoria won't have anticipated. After ending the call, I felt energized for the first time since receiving the DNA test results yesterday. Was it really only yesterday? The path forward wasn't clear yet, but having a purpose beyond my own shock and humiliation provided a welcome anchor. I texted the officer that I would be staying at the penthouse overnight and ordered basic necessities for delivery: toiletries, a change of clothes, even a phone charger. One of the benefits of Manhattan living was the ability to acquire almost anything at any hour for a price. While waiting for the deliveries, I continued exploring the penthouse, mentally cataloging what I would keep from the furnishings and what I would replace. The previous owners had favored a minimalist aesthetic that bordered on austere, plenty of chrome and glass, with occasional pops of primary colors that struck me as trying too hard to be contemporary. I would soften it, perhaps, but maintain the clean lines and absence of clutter. Nothing that evoked memories of the life I was leaving behind. My phone rang again, an unknown number this time. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. "Meredith Kincaid," I said cautiously. "Ms. Kincaid, this is Dr. Eleanor Patel from Mount Sinai Hospital." A brisk, professional voice. "I understand you're the emergency contact for Richard Winters?" I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm his wife, yes, though we're separated." "Has something happened?" Mr. Winters experienced a severe reaction to the substance he ingested earlier today. "He's currently in intensive care. Hospital policy requires us to notify next of kin." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Despite everything, the thought of Richard in medical distress produced an unwelcome twist of concern. A reflex from 10 years of caring for the man I thought I knew. "What's his condition?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Stable, but serious." "The substance appears to have been a compound sedative with unexpected side effects. He's experiencing respiratory depression and cardiac arrhythmia." "I see. And is he conscious?" "Intermittently. We've informed the police officers monitoring him, of course." I should feel something more, I thought distantly. Satisfaction, perhaps, that Richard's careful planning had backfired, or vindictive pleasure that he was suffering after causing me such pain. Instead, I felt only a hollow exhaustion. "Thank you for informing me, Dr. Patel. Please keep me updated on any significant changes." I provided my email rather than my phone number. I didn't want or need real-time updates on Richard's condition. After hanging up, I stood motionless in the empty penthouse, absorbing this latest development. Richard in the ICU, Victoria still at large, my reputation and privacy about to be sacrificed on the altar of the 24-hour news cycle. And somewhere out there, 7 other people who had experienced variations of the same elaborate con, their trust violated in the same calculated way as mine. The buzzer sounded. My delivery had arrived. I instructed the doorman to accept it and send it up with my bodyguard's approval. Minutes later, a bag containing the basic necessities I'd ordered appeared at the door, handed over by the officer who continued to maintain a discreet distance. In T, the master bathroom. I stripped off the clothes I'd been wearing since dawn, my armor for the confrontation with Richard, and stepped into the shower, letting scalding water wash away the physical residue of the day. I scrubbed almost violently at the spot where the wire had been attached, as if I could erase the memory of deception along with the adhesive. Clean and dressed in the simple cotton pajamas I'd ordered, I returned to the living area and poured a third scotch, this one with ice. The alcohol wasn't helping, but it provided the illusion of comfort. My phone chimed with an email alert, Dr. Patel sending the promised update on Richard's condition. I hesitated before opening it, uncertain whether I wanted to know more. Finally, curiosity won out. "Mr. Winters's condition has deteriorated. He's been placed on a ventilator to support respiratory function. Toxicology is still working to identify the exact compound. Police have been notified of the change in status." Ventilator. The word triggered an unwelcome memory. Richard and I updating our advance directives 3 years ago, him stating emphatically that he would never want to be kept alive by machines. It had seemed like such an intimate conversation at the time, sharing our wishes for end-of-life care. Now I wondered if it had been just another calculated performance, designed to reinforce the illusion of our partnership. I closed the email without responding. Whatever happened to Richard now was beyond my concern, or should be rationally. The fact that I felt anything at all was merely the residual effect of a decade spent believing in a relationship that had never truly existed. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Abigail. Just saw the news about Richard. Are you okay? Call me no matter how late. So it had begun. The public revelation of my humiliation. I wasn't ready to speak to Abigail, to hear the mixture of shock and sympathy in her voice. Instead, I texted back. I'm fine. We'll call tomorrow. Don't worry. A lie, of course, but a necessary one. I wasn't fine, might not be for a long time, but I wasn't broken either. And I had work to do. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to our firm's PR department, outlining the narrative I wanted established, not as a victim of Richard's deception, but as the attorney who had uncovered and helped prosecute a sophisticated fraud scheme. The emphasis would be on my professional acumen, not my personal humiliation. Next, I drafted a message to the firm's managing partners, requesting a 3-month sabbatical effective immediately. Not because I was too emotionally fragile to work, though perhaps I was, but to focus on resolving the legal and financial complications arising from recent events. Professional, pragmatic, maintaining dignity in the face of personal disaster. Finally, I created a new document titled EWT Victims, a preliminary outline of how I might approach the other targets of Richard and Victoria's scheme. Not with pity or commiseration, but with a proposal. A way to transform individual losses into collective strength. The beginnings of a plan were taking shape, not just for recovery, but for a reckoning that neither Richard nor Victoria would have anticipated. If I had learned one thing from this catastrophe, it was that the most effective retaliation comes not from emotion, but from strategic calculation. My phone buzzed with another text, the security officer, reporting someone at the elevator bank claiming to be my sister, Abigail. Despite my assurances she had come anyway. It's fine, I texted back. She can come up. Minutes later, Abigail burst through the door, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Unlike me, she had inherited our mother's warm coloring and petite stature, her anxiety evident in the flush across her cheeks. Meredith, she began, then stopped, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. What is this place? And why is there an armed guard outside the door? My new home as of tonight, I replied, gesturing to the sweeping view. The guard is a precaution. It's been a complicated day. Complicated? Abigail's voice rose. I just saw Richard's face on the news. Something about fraud and arrests and... She broke off, studying me more carefully. Are you drunk? I glanced at the scotch in my hand. Working on it. Meredith, what the hell is going on? Why didn't you call me? I sighed, gesturing for her to sit. It's a long story, Abby. The short version is that Richard has been running an elaborate fraud scheme for at least 12 years. I discovered it yesterday, helped the authorities arrest him today, and now I'm trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Abigail sank onto the sleek sofa, her expression stunned. Fraud? Richard? That doesn't... She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Actually, that tracks. I never trusted him. A surprised laugh escaped me, the first genuine one in days. Since when? You loved Richard. Everyone loved Richard. That was rather the point of him. She shook her head. I tolerated Richard because you seemed happy, but there was always something performative about him, like he was playing a role instead of being a person. She reached for my scotch, took a sip and grimaced. God, how do you drink this stuff? It tastes like bandages. Acquired taste, I said, reclaiming the glass. Like husbands, apparently. So, what kind of fraud are we talking about? The news was vague, just that he'd been arrested as part of a long-running financial scheme. I gave her the condensed version, the fictional daughter, the monthly payments, the properties, the other victims. With each detail, Abigail's expression shifted from shock to outrage. "That bastard," she said when I finished. All those times he couldn't make family gatherings because of visiting Emma. It was all lies? Every word, I confirmed. The reality? Still difficult to fully absorb. 10 years of elaborate fiction. And the secretary? Victoria? She was in on it the whole time? From the beginning. She and Richard were partners in every sense, apparently. And now she's vanished. Escaped custody this afternoon. Abigail set her jaw in the stubborn expression I recognized from childhood battles. "What do you need? Money? A place to stay? Someone to hunt down this Victoria person and push her into traffic?" The fierce loyalty behind the offer warmed something cold inside me. I'm covered financially, and I've got this place for now. As for Victoria, I hesitated, then decided Abigail deserved the truth. "I'm working on something. A way to ensure she and Richard don't profit from what they've done, even if she manages to access funds the authorities haven't frozen." "What kind of something?" Abigail asked suspiciously. "I'm still figuring that out, but it involves contacting the other people they defrauded. Building a coalition of sorts." Abigail studied me, concern evident in her eyes. "Meredith, when was the last time you slept? You've got that scary intensity you used to get before big trials. The one that usually preceded a migraine or a meltdown." She wasn't wrong. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation with Richard was ebbing, leaving exhaustion in its wake. But sleep seemed impossible with my mind still racing through possibilities and contingencies. "I'll sleep when I've figured this out," I said, knowing how unreasonable it sounded even as the words left my mouth. "No, you'll sleep now," Abigail insisted, rising to take the scotch from my hand. "Whatever revenge scheme you're plotting will be more effective if you're not hallucinating from exhaustion." "It's not revenge," I protested. "It's justice." "Fine. Justice, then. But justice can wait until morning." She guided me toward the master bedroom with the gentle firmness that made her such an effective mother to her daughters. "I'm staying, by the way. I'll take one of these ridiculously minimalist guest rooms." I knew better than to argue. Once Abigail decided to take care of someone, resistance was futile. And truthfully, the thought of not being alone in this strange new space was unexpectedly comforting. "Fine," I conceded. "But just for tonight. I need to handle this my way." "Your way usually involves working yourself into the ground," she noted, pulling back the covers on the platform bed. "But we'll negotiate that in the morning." As I settled into the unfamiliar bed, Abigail dimmed the lights and moved to leave. "Abby," I called, my voice smaller than I intended. "Thank you for coming." She paused at the door. "That's what family does, Mer. The real kind, not the fictional kind Richard invented." Her voice hardened on his name. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." After she left, I lay staring at the ceiling, the city lights casting patterns across the darkened room. For the first time since receiving the DNA test results, I felt a flicker of something beyond shock and anger. A tentative hope that perhaps with time, I might reclaim not just my financial assets, but my sense of self. My phone buzzed one final time, another email from Dr. Patel. I hesitated, then opened it, needing to know. "Mr. Winters has stabilized but remains in critical condition. Police have requested notification of any change in status that might permit questioning." I closed the email without emotion. Whatever happened to Richard now, recovery, prosecution, imprisonment, it would unfold without my participation. My focus had shifted to the future, to the plan taking shape in my mind. As sleep finally began to claim me, one thought remained clear. Richard and Victoria had underestimated me. They had mistaken my trust for blindness, my commitment for weakness. They had failed to consider what would happen if I ever turned my professional skills. The strategic thinking, the meticulous preparation, the relentless pursuit of favorable outcomes toward understanding their deception, their mistake. My opportunity. Tomorrow, I would begin contacting the other victims. Together, we would ensure that Richard and Victoria's greatest achievement became their most spectacular failure. With that resolution firmly in mind, I surrendered to exhaustion, sleeping dreamlessly for the first time in months. 6 months later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, watching autumn leaves swirl along Riverside Boulevard. The Hudson River reflected a gunmetal sky, promising rain by evening. Behind me, voices murmured as caterers arranged platters on the dining table I'd selected precisely because it could seat 12 people comfortably, an intentional departure from the intimate four-seater Richard and I had shared. "Everything's ready," Abigail announced, appearing at my side. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I nodded, adjusting the collar of my charcoal silk blouse. "It's time." The doorbell chimed. Abigail squeezed my hand before going to answer it, leaving me a final moment of solitude before facing the gathering I'd spent months arranging. They arrived within minutes of each other, 7 individuals connected by a single devastating thread. Dr. Eliza Chen, neurosurgeon, the first to arrive, impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit that rivaled my own corporate armor. Michael Dawson, tech entrepreneur, his boyish features belying the sharp intelligence that had built a $1 million startup. Rebecca Winters, no relation to Richard, a coincidence he had likely exploited. Financial analyst, her wary gaze sweeping the room as she entered. Harrison James, architect, silver-haired and distinguished. Sophia Rodriguez, pharmaceutical executive, whose payments to the Emma Walsh Trust had continued the longest after her relationship with Victoria ended. Caroline Blackwood, venture capitalist, whose discovery of financial irregularities had triggered the initial investigation. And finally, Thomas Miller, prosecutor turned judge, whose connection to Richard predated all others, the first victim in their elaborate scheme. I'd spoken with each individually over the past months, piecing together the complete timeline of Richard and Victoria's operation. Each had a variation of the same story, a relationship with either Richard or Victoria, the revelation of a child from a previous relationship, the obligation that seemed so reasonable at the time, the monthly payments that continued long after the relationships ended, the shame that had kept them from questioning, from investigating, from recognizing the fraud for what it was. Now they sat around my dining table, strangers united by a common betrayal, sipping wine and regarding me with expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious hope. "Thank you all for coming," I began, taking my place at the head of the table. "I know this wasn't an easy decision. For most of us, the events of the past 6 months are something we'd rather forget." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "But forgetting isn't an option," I continued. "Not just because the legal proceedings against Richard will keep this in our lives for the foreseeable future, but because what happened to each of us represents a fundamental breach of trust that can't be simply dismissed or buried. Some of us have been trying to bury it for years," Thomas Miller noted, his deep voice carrying the weight of his decade-long deception. "I paid into that trust for nearly 8 years, convinced I was supporting a child who never existed. We all did," Rebecca interjected. "That's why we're here, isn't it? To commiserate over our collective stupidity?" "No," I said firmly. "We're here to transform individual losses into collective justice." I activated the large screen mounted on the wall, displaying a complex flowchart that represented 6 months of meticulous financial forensics. As you know, authorities have frozen all assets directly tied to Emmeline Holdings and the Emma Walsh Trust. The properties are in receivership pending distribution to victims, that's us, and Richard's offshore accounts have been located and seized. I paused. But Victoria Walsh remains at large, and with her approximately $8 million that was transferred through a series of shell companies before the authorities could trace it. "So she won," Caroline said bitterly. "She's probably on a beach somewhere, laughing at all of us." Not exactly, I replied, advancing to the next slide, a map dotted with red markers. These represent property holdings that Victoria established under various aliases over the past 15 years. Properties not directly connected to Emmeline Holdings or Richard, but purchased with funds that ultimately originated from the Emma Walsh Trust. How did you find these? Eliza asked, leaning forward with interest. The same way I unraveled Richard's deception, by following the money. I didn't mention the private investigators I'd hired, the legal maneuvers that had stretched, ethical boundaries, the sleepless nights spent connecting fragments of information into a cohesive whole. Collectively, these properties are worth approximately $20 million. Add that to the $6 million in seized assets from Emmeline Holdings, and we have a recovery pool of $26 million. Split 8 ways, that's $3.25 million each. Michael calculated quickly. Less than some of us lost, but not insignificant. That's one option, I acknowledged. But I'm proposing something different. I advanced to the final slide, the proposal I'd spent months refining. Rather than dividing the assets, I suggest we pool them into a foundation dedicated to detecting and preventing similar fraud schemes. An organization that would provide resources for victims, education for the public, and funding for specialized prosecution of these types of crimes. Silence greeted my proposal, each person processing the unexpected suggestion. You want us to give up our individual restitution? Harrison finally asked. I'm suggesting we transform our individual losses into something meaningful, something that ensures what happened to us doesn't happen to others. Something that transforms us from victims into advocates. And what happens to Victoria? Sophia demanded. She just gets away with it? No, I said firmly. Part of the foundation's mission would be to maintain a dedicated team focused on locating her and any remaining assets. And in the meantime, every property she thought she had secured would be repurposed in direct opposition to her objectives. It's elegant, Thomas said slowly. A form of justice that transcends simple restitution. It's also asking a lot, Rebecca countered. Some of us have financial obligations that were impacted by what we lost to this scheme, which is why the proposal includes an initial distribution to each of us, 20% of our documented losses, with the remainder going to the foundation. Those who wish to contribute more can do so. The discussion that followed was robust, occasionally heated, but ultimately productive. By the time dessert was served, 7 of the 8 had agreed to the proposal in principle, with only Rebecca requesting time to consider her options. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Thomas lingered, studying the view that had become my sanctuary over the past months. Richard's sentencing is next week, he noted. Will you attend? I shook my head. I've said everything I need to say to Richard. The last time I'd seen my husband had been in the hospital, 3 days after his arrest. I'd gone not out of concern for his condition, which had stabilized, but to deliver a message that I was done being defined by his deception. That whatever punishment the legal system delivered would be supplemented by something he wouldn't anticipate. The complete repurposing of everything he and Victoria had built to prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. His response had been typical Richard, a mix of charm and calculation, suggesting that perhaps we could work together, leverage my legal expertise and his unique understanding of such schemes to create something mutually beneficial. I had left without responding, his voice calling after me with increasing desperation as he realized I was truly beyond his manipulation. 20 years is the recommendation, Thomas continued, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Victoria, if they ever find her, faces similar charges. They'll find her, I said with quiet certainty. The foundation will make sure of it. After the last guest departed, Abigail helped me clear the remnants of the dinner. Well, she prompted. Did you get what you wanted? I considered the question. 6 months ago, what I had wanted was simple: revenge, restitution, the restoration of the life I had believed was mine. Now, my objectives had evolved into something more complex. Not just personal recovery, but systemic change. It's a start, I replied, carefully wrapping leftover pastries for Abigail to take to her daughters. The foundation will take time to establish properly, but with the combined expertise in that room, it has potential. And you? Abigail persisted. Not the foundation, not the victims' coalition, not the asset recovery. You, Meredith. Are you finding your way forward? The question caught me off guard. In the months since Richard's arrest, I had channeled all my energy into practical matters, establishing myself in the penthouse, managing the media fallout, returning to work at the firm, where Martin had protected my position despite my extended absence, and meticulously building the case for what would become the foundation. I had scarcely paused to consider my personal recovery, apart from these external markers of progress. I'm not sure, I admitted. But I'm not standing still either. Abigail nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. One step at a time. That's all any of us can manage after something like this. After she left, I returned to the window wall, watching lights flicker across the river. The rain I had anticipated earlier had begun, drops streaming down the glass in rivulets that distorted the view, much like the tears I had finally allowed myself in private moments over the past months. My phone chimed with a news alert. Richard. Winters seeks plea deal in fraud case, offers information on missing co-conspirator. So Richard was finally turning on Victoria. Another calculation, another attempt to mitigate consequences. I closed the alert without reading further. Whatever maneuvering occurred in the legal proceedings, my focus remained on the foundation, on transforming individual trauma into collective purpose. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Richard and Victoria's elaborate deception had ultimately connected 8 strangers with the resources and determination to dismantle similar schemes. That the very skills that had made each of us successful enough to target, strategic thinking, financial acumen, professional networks, were now being leveraged against the system they had exploited. In the reflection of the window, I caught sight of myself, still recognizable as the woman who had confronted Richard 6 months ago, but changed in subtle ways. The defensive armor of perfect grooming and tailored clothing remained, but something in my posture had shifted. Less rigid, perhaps, more grounded. The DNA test that had shattered my world had also, paradoxically, set me free from a marriage built on fiction, from the willful blindness I had maintained in service to that fiction, from the isolation that had made me vulnerable to Richard's manipulation. My phone chimed again. A text from Martin. Closing arguments tomorrow in the Westmore merger. Ready? I smiled, typing back, always. And I was. Ready not just for the professional challenges that had always energized me, but for the personal reconstruction that continued day by day. The foundation would be announced next week, transforming private humiliation into public purpose. Richard would face sentencing, Victoria would eventually be found, and the financial web they had woven would be dismantled thread by thread. But tonight, in this moment, I allowed myself to acknowledge a simple truth, that sometimes destruction clears the path for something stronger to emerge. That sometimes a DNA test revealing a child doesn't exist becomes the catalyst for discovering what truly does. I turned from the window and moved through the penthouse, switching off lights as I went, comfortable at last in the space that was wholly mine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to rebuild. Tonight, that knowledge was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.